Welcome in, everyone. As I see everyone signing into this session, want to welcome you and thank you for attending Guidelines and Practical Applications for Generative AI and OER. We are joined with Jeff Gallant, and he is the Program Director of Affordable Learning Georgia, an initiative of the University Systems of Georgia. We also have Dr. Richard Zrake. He is a professor and formerly the founding director of the School of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Central Florida. We have invited them both to discuss these guidelines and also the practical applications. And I will let them take it from here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lily, for having us in for this presentation. I think it's going to work very well with the discussions that we just had with David from his presentation and then his drop-in session. It'll move into how a system can deal with the changing nature of generative AI, and then it'll move into teaching and learning with AI with Dr. Zrake, who's also right here with us. So first, I'll start out, and this was created using generative AI, this little bird over here, if you can't tell by the weird-looking particle effects. But yeah, the idea for Affordable Learning Georgia is going to be a lot about how do we approach this from a system-wide perspective, where we've got multiple institutions who have multiple departments, who have a lot of expert faculty, who all teach in very different ways. What can we do? Well, first of all, I need to tell you what Affordable Learning Georgia is. And I hope this doesn't take too long because organizational talk can really put me to sleep sometimes. But the University System of Georgia is all 26 public institutions, the four-year ones in Georgia. Now, there are other systems like the Technical College System of Georgia. Those are two-year institutions that do things like associate's programs and career training. You often will know them as community colleges. That's not us. And then the University System of Georgia has within it the statewide library consortium, Galileo. So at some point, the USG housed the virtual library program. Basically, hey, e-resources are really cool. How can we scale them? And then K-12 signed on, and the technical colleges signed on, and the private colleges signed on. And now Galileo serves everybody. But Affordable Learning Georgia is just for the USG institutions, and we are aimed at reducing the cost of course materials for students. That's very important. It's not just open materials, it is affordable materials, and thereby increasing those access to materials and hopefully affecting their success. Um, I'm sure that plenty of you in here know the rationale behind things like that, and have seen things like the Florida Virtual Campus survey that talks about students not purchasing textbooks often, students not registering for courses because of the high cost of them. That's the kind of thing we're trying to address. So what can we do? We can't tell folks, you must adopt OER. You must take this OpenStax textbook, everybody in anatomy and physiology, and use that as your textbook. That would be way out of our wheelhouse. We do not know how to teach anatomy and physiology. I don't. I'm, once again, yet another musician in the open education space. So what we do is we provide support, we provide systems, and we provide a way for great ideas to emerge. So first of all, we're a center for support. We've got a website. It's got guides, including what we're going to talk about today. We also, though, started with a network of champions, a librarian, a faculty member, and an instructional designer at every institution that meets with us monthly and goes over what's new at ALG, what's new out in the open space, how can we help you in better ways. We tend to grow and evolve alongside our champions as they turn over and new people come in and start learning and bringing new ideas. We take those new ideas and we're like, that's a great idea. We're going to start doing that ourselves. Having a network of champions is amazing. You don't want to just run a program like this by yourself. But also, yeah, we have a lot of outreach. So we've got our newsletter, we've got our listservs. You know the deal. If you've got a program, you do this kind of outreach quite a bit. We also adopted the doers guidelines for new practices for promotion and tenure. So what we did was we took that and brought it into our promotion and tenure framework, which has 4 buckets instead of 3, including student success. And we did what open people do, and we remixed it for our purposes. So that was something that we already had. We can't tell folks how to do promotion and tenure. We can create guidelines for them to bring open into promotion and tenure. We can also create guidelines that faculty can look at and say, here's how I can put my OER work into promotion and tenure. We can't say you must. And also, we provide systems to help with this. So we didn't know back when folks were starting out putting open in their classes that they were going to create so many materials. But sure enough, they did. So we have a repository and a good old digital commons one, and an open textbook publisher in OpenALG, which is a manifold instance. You could put everything from a project on one page and it links all to it. So you can do a web readable text. You can also link to the PowerPoints on that homepage. You can describe it all there. It's really nice. And because we can't tell folks how to teach, what OER to make, what's going to be best for their students and their class, because we are not them. We have a granting, what I would like to call an engine of sorts, that brings out the creative projects across the system and lets them emerge and actually get put into action. And that's our grants. So we allow teams of faculty and professional staff, like librarians, like instructional designers, web designers, graphic designers, etc., to work together on bringing affordable materials into the classroom, including OER, including no-cost and low-cost options. We've had pilot projects as well that adopt the grant framework and do it in different ways, like Open Mathematics, and also like Lumen Waymaker, which was the adaptive learning. So what does this mean when we approach AI? Well, we cannot mandate that folks use some sort of AI tool. You must use Claude. You must use GPT-4o. We can't do that. And we wouldn't want to do that. We prefer that instructors have the freedom to teach and to deem correct and like appropriate what it is they're teaching with for their students. If we are just kind of dictating exactly what folks are going to teach with, that alternative can get very terrifying very quickly. If you've seen institutions that are now just a one publisher shop, you'll know what I mean by this. We also can't just implement tech system-wide and just say, all right, here's our framework for AI. Here's the AI everybody's going to use. We can't do that. There's an IT department. They are scanning the landscape like most of us are. We still want to make a difference, though. So how do we do that if we can't tell folks what to do? Well, we have our grants. And what's happening within our grants at the moment is that artificial intelligence is being integrated into these projects that have emerged. So they are permitted within our projects, just like any other tools are permitted within our projects, so long as they're secure, so long as they are not sharing student information, things like that. So what we've seen so far, the easy ones have been using image generators for the graphic design part of it. If you don't have a big graphic design team, like ask Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College to get one of their graphic designers. No, that's not going to happen. So if you have an image generator that can help enhance how your text looks, well, there you go. If you've got a large language model and you want to make summaries of the more complex things that you have, that's what folks tend to do with this. They're also doing some research projects on AI and learning. Someone's building a custom LLM as part of their comp sci course. And when we looked at this grant application, we're like, is this feasible? But I was like, well, yeah, okay. They are the comp sci people who teach how to do this. So they are hosting it on their server and they know how. Great. Let's see how that works. So we support faculty by taking a look at the big questions that they have, which are, if I'm using OER, if I'm creating OER and I'm using AI at some point in that process, how does that fit in? We're not going to go and say, here's a policy on AI. You must do it this way. You can't do it this other way. The USG does not have that kind of policy either. And as we heard in David's discussions earlier, it's probably not the best time to get started on an AI policy as this stuff develops. But they need a touch point. So we create, just like with promotion and tenure, a set of guidelines, some practices that you can use that are going to work out to the best of our knowledge. So we gather information on this and we try to make it um, applicable to faculty members who author OER. And that's kind of the important thing. There are a lot of great accessibility guides out there, but when we build an accessibility guide, we are building it for faculty who are creating OER and who probably don't have a lot of time and a lot of background knowledge on the subject. We don't want to bowl them over with a whole bunch of legalese. We also don't want to go too far into domains that aren't about creating OER using AI. So yeah, we had some talks with folks at Creative Commons, Will Cross, and Meredith Jacob hosted some webinars on this. It was really neat to hear about all of that and participate in some of their focus groups and really get an idea of where the discourse was starting on AI and OER. And from there, we've just kept abreast of all the news that has happened. So the result is a set of guidelines for using generative AI tools in OER. Let me see if I can copy this link. No, not while Zoom's doing this. Hold on 1 second. Nope. Okay. So if somebody can if somebody can get this and paste it in, that'd be fine. But I'm full screen right now, so I can't. Thank you so much, Sierra. Yeah. So first we let folks know, hey, here's what this is about. Here's what this isn't. It's not about telling you how to build an LLM or anything like that. This is get to know how copyright works and how copyright works within fair use. Okay, now that you know that, let's talk a little bit about how copyright would interact with AI. There is now a bigger note on the US Copyright Office than there used to be because they released a report on copyrightability in January. And it really illustrates that there's less of a need to create new laws about AI in order to determine whether or not something's copyrightable. So that was really important and interesting. So we took all of their big bullet points and we put under them text that hopefully faculty would understand if they are creating OER. And that's what this is all about. None of this is new. None of this is groundbreaking. It is just put into words in a way that hopefully will inform faculty who are creating OER and using AI tools, including mixing OER with AI-generated stuff. So if you are remixing something using a large language model, for example, summarizing, what do? What's legal, but what's ethical? So yes, a lot of the stuff that is just generated out of a large language model is uncopyrightable and within the public domain. But if you know that you are using a particular open resource to do so, and you know that you are remixing that resource, you may be able to then say, okay, well, I've just used a tool to remix this resource. This resource is therefore still under an open license. So well, again, this is very early, and we are jumping in early and trying to make it the best of our knowledge. But yeah, it's a way to let folks who want to get stuff done know how they should get it done in 2025 or right now. We were a finalist in the OE Global Awards. We did not win. That's totally fine. The people who met the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, like the Mexican Project, that was really neat. The open audio books are really cool. You should check them out. I talked to the guy who did the audiobook project. It was awesome. So how can you use these guidelines? Well, they're CC BY, so please do revise and remix them. let me know if something is new or if something is wrong, and we will take a look and probably revise it based on that. And thank you for it too. If you're the campus AI expert, let us know. And if you remix the guide, let us know, and we'll probably borrow your ideas as well. So we can't mandate, we can't give advice. We are not teaching people how to use AI tools to teach because we are not those instructors. But what we can do is give advice for faculty to teach with AI tools because faculty are the ones who teach with it. They're the ones who should be implementing AI, not us. And therefore, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Zarek, who is currently teaching with AI tools. So I'm going to operate the slides from here, but take it away.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Welcome. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you the OER resource that I created. I want to say up front that I'm very new at doing this. This is my first journey into creating an OER. So I want to thank Lily and her colleagues for guiding me through it. So one of the things that I wanted to come across today in the presentation was the idea that even if you're new at doing this, it can be a fairly straightforward process if you have a clear goal for what it is that you're trying to do. Or if you're already doing something with AI and you want to take that content and make it an OER, there's ways to do that when you have people like Lily and others to help guide you to do that. So I'm a speech language pathologist. I'm a professor here at UCF, and I've been a speech pathologist for, 35 years or so. About 30 of those years, I've been a faculty member. And I teach courses in the area of adult medical speech pathology. And so I teach the courses that our graduate students need to learn how to work with individuals who've had strokes, head injuries, neurologic diseases, and the like. And in those courses, there's a lot of clinical content, as you can imagine. So some of it is theoretical and foundational knowledge and reading the literature and learning about the evidence base for what we do as therapists. But a large part of it is showing patient videos, creating patient scenarios, doing some simulations, whether they be live simulations with live individuals or computer-based simulations, and really give the students in the classroom an opportunity to apply what they're learning in the classroom as part of the learning experience, and then outside of the classroom when they're in our clinic with real patients. And so over the years, long before AI and probably even before I was aware of OER, I used a lot of case studies in my teaching because I had the clinical experience to draw on, and I could tell stories and develop cases from my own personal experience as a therapist. And I would use those cases to illustrate either how to assess a patient, diagnose a patient, come up with a treatment plan for a particular patient. And I would use those either as homework assignments, I would use them for in-class discussions, I would use those cases for exams. So students had to, read a case study and diagnose the patient based on the information that was in the case study and so forth. So I already had a clear idea of what I wanted to do and what I had been doing prior to AI and prior to thinking about what I'm doing as an OER resource. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was, explain and sort of illustrate how I did it just in a very, very simple baby step way for the very first time that I've done this. And so if we can go to the next slide, I'll kind of take you through it. So one of the things that I chose, a case that I chose, was a patient that has a disorder called apraxia of speech. And I put the definition here on the screen. Apraxia means without movement or restricted movement. And so it's a condition, as it says here, that makes it difficult for a person to speak clearly because their brain struggles to coordinate the movements needed to say words. So individuals who have apraxia of speech know what they want to say, but they can't say it properly. So somewhere between the brain and the mouth and the other structures in the body, the signal gets interrupted and the words do not come out clearly. And it oftentimes happens after a stroke or a brain injury. And it's very frustrating for the individual because they know what they want to say, but they can't say it. It comes out wrong. They hear that. They get frustrated. They try again. The second time they try, it's different than the first time, but still wrong. And then maybe they try a third time and it's wrong again, but different than the second time and different than the first time. And so it creates a real communication barrier. And of course, you know, when you think about one of the things that makes us uniquely human is our ability to communicate. And so it has a real impact on an individual's quality of life in general, and it could have impacts on their vocational, educational, and social lives. And so the case that I'm going to talk about is a patient with acquired apraxia of speech. Next slide, Jeff. So I've been using ChatGPT quite a bit to help me create course materials in general. I've been using it to revise some of my lectures, to assess some of my slide content and help me simplify it and make it better, suggest graphics that could support some of my slides, and just use it in general. I've been using it just to refine my presentations in class, my lectures in class. And so I thought, well, I'm already doing that, and I already have some cases that I wrote from my own personal experience. So let me see if I can have ChatGPT generate more of the cases based on sort of a template that I had already had from my own knowledge base. And so that's what I did. And this is just one example. So this is the prompt that I put, and I'll read it for those that can't read it. It says, generate a detailed case report for a 62-year-old male patient with acquired apraxia of speech, secondary to a stroke in Broca's area, and that's the part of the brain that controls speech. Includes sections on background, medical imaging findings, neurologic exam, speech and language evaluation, diagnosis, discussion of the disorder, management strategies, prognosis, and a conclusion. Use clinical terminology and a structured format suitable for a motor speech disorders course. So that's the prompt that I put in, and it generated a case for me, which I'll show you in a moment. But one of the things I want to say before I show you the case is that the beauty of this is that I could generate, and I have generated, dozens of cases based on this prompt for a variety of disorders, not just for apraxia of speech. But I could take this basic prompt for apraxia of speech, and I could add a few elements to it to make the patient more severe, less severe, different gender, different socioeconomic or racial cultural background. I could introduce all kinds of variables to have multiple cases that I could use, that I could cycle through on exams, homework assignments, class discussions, and the like. So with that in mind, let's just look at one example of a case, the one that Lily and I used for OER. So I don't know how well you'll be able to read this. I'm certainly not going to read all of it, but what it did is it generated a 2-page case report. Actually, it was 1 page. I had to just do some screenshots to get it onto 2 pages. But you can see the main categories. It gave me everything that I had asked it to give in the prompt, all the sections on, you know, neurologic exam, speech and language evaluation, diagnosis, prognosis, management plan, and so forth. And so this is a resource that I could put in, like in Canvas, as when I'm lecturing on this particular disorder. I could put this case or a number of other cases for students to refer to learn how to apply the information. We could pull it up in class, and we could discuss it in class. What I plan to do in the future is have students generate their own cases and look at the validity of those cases for their own learning purposes and so forth. But basically, it gave me, and I'm telling you, it took me longer to do the prompt than it did for ChatGPT to generate the report. I mean, it generated the report in 10 seconds. Okay. And so then, of course, what I had to do is validate it and look at the case and make sure, as the content expert, that the case is a valid case. So we can go to the next screen or next slide. We can talk a little bit about that. So a PDF of the case report was generated, and then I worked with Lily, who I'm very grateful for, and we created the OER resource. And there's a link there, which I'm not going to be able to click on, but if somebody can click on it, perhaps we can bring it up. But it's in the repository, the STARS library. And it's basically the case that you just saw with the headings and so forth that one would need. But the link is right there if anybody wants to take a look at it.
Yeah, and it was shared in the chat as well.
Okay, great. So, so you see what it actually looks like as a resource. If we could go to the next slide. So the most important part in this process, in my opinion, and this is true of any way that you use AI, is you have to rely on the content expert to do the review, or content experts to do the review. I mean, there's lots of times I've used ChatGPT and it gives me, you know, or any other AI tool, especially large language models, and it gives me stuff that's completely inaccurate. But if I didn't know any better as the expert, if you were to read it and you're not an expert in my area, it sounds good, and it looks good, and it sort of is talking the talk, but it's not really walking the walk, so to speak. So I have to spend a lot of time reviewing the cases that are generated by AI to make sure that they're accurate. I've had other colleagues look at them to make sure that they're accurate, and I've had to go back and tweak them to make small changes. By and large, on the first pass, most of the time, it's 90+% of the way there. But there's always one or two little artifacts that I have to, look very closely for and catch. Again, particularly on the treatment side of the report or the case study, I have to make sure that it's, cross-referenced against established guidelines for clinical practice, that it's drawing upon the evidence base, that's a research validated evidence-based practice. So for example, this is one of the citations that I just put up that has the evidence base for treatment of acquired apraxia of speech. So I use this as a sort of an external validity to make sure that what was being reported in this report by Ballard and colleagues in 2015 was actually reflected in the case report that was generated by the AI tool. And so I do that for all the cases, regardless of what the disorder is. And I have these evidence-based practice articles anyhow. I have the students read these articles, and I have them in a repository for them as part of the web course. So the materials are already there. It's just a matter of making sure that they're cross-referenced to the guidelines. And occasionally I will put the guidelines into ChatGPT. And when I ask it to generate the case reports, I ask it to be mindful of the guidelines to make sure that the treatment recommendations that ChatGPT is giving me are in line with the guidelines. And so that's another way to make sure that the content that is being generated and being distributed to the students is valid content. Okay, next slide, please. So I put a couple of bullet points on how to validate the generative AI prompts. And one of the things, of course, is to make sure that the content is accurate and clinically relevant. That's one of the areas that I want to make sure that, there's enough content in there that the students can apply the information to the clinical scenario that they might be facing. So the prompt has to be very specific about making sure that the clinical relevance is emphasized in the case report. And again, expert oversight, I've talked about that. And of course, Jeff, you did a great job of talking about ethical evaluation. We're not using real cases, but they're based on real life experiences. Again, trying to be consistent with AI best practices, which are evolving and I'm learning about as I do it. And then, of course, the empirical evaluation. And I can tell you anecdotally, when I've done this with students recently, I've had students tell me, so we discussed one in class not too long ago, and a couple of the students the following week, over the next 2 weeks in class said, oh, when I was in clinic, we saw a patient and it reminded me of the case that we just talked about in class, or there was some element of it that reminded them of a case that we had talked about in class that had been generated by AI. So, and again, they had done that in the past as well when I was making up the cases. But that was a good feeling to know that, they took something from it that at least anecdotally they felt like they could, or reported to me that they could apply in their clinical scenarios when they were at the clinic or out in the hospital seeing patients. Next slide. And so then I just put a couple of references up on this page related to AI in healthcare, which is an emerging field, as you can imagine, an emerging area of interest is AI in healthcare. And that's, again, an ever-evolving field. My knowledge of it and my experience with it is very limited, and it's very limited to LLMs right now. But of course, it's being used for all kinds of things related to diagnosing, looking at images like mammograms, for example. I just saw an article the other day where somebody has trained an AI to listen to the speech of somebody with apraxia of speech, an audio recording, and diagnose it and describe the features of that speech. And so there's a lot of things that are very exciting on the horizon. Again, these are tools. They don't replace humans, but they certainly can supplement what we do. in a very powerful way. So I put some references there related to AI in healthcare. And then I think the final slide is our questions and answers. So Jeff's going to lead us in the remaining time that we have.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the chat for a second here. I want you to share some answers in here, the audience. So the first one, if you're using AI tools at all, not just for OER, but in general, how's it going and what have you noticed? That's something that we haven't discussed over on ours. So I want to know how y'all have been doing in using these AI tools. I'll give a few seconds for folks to start typing. Oh, okay. Go back to the validation bullet list, please. We'll do that. Yep. There it is. Okay, so I hear from Bob, lots of repeating or rewording of prompts. So, Richard, have you wound up having to do that a lot too? A lot of like, well, let's try that again. It didn't quite work out.
Yes, actually, I would say that's the norm. The prompt that I put up there is sort of what's evolved to be the most efficient prompt, I guess, for the lack of a better word. But even with that, it's very much been a learning process of doing multiple prompts to just make sure that I get it where I need it to be.
Oh, Lisa has noticed faculty can respond viscerally when you suggest AI as a tool. Some only view AI as images and recoil as using for stealing art. Yeah, I mean that is definitely part of the news cycle on it. That one art contest where somebody won by basically generating AI art, not saying it was AI, and then it was mostly a replication of one artwork. That was pretty scary. I think the more, and we heard about this earlier from David, the more examples you can have of things that are pragmatic, stuff that you can use, as opposed to like, here's the big scary news article. Like if all you knew about driving a car was an article about a deadly car pileup that set itself on fire, you probably wouldn't want to drive a car. But if you've got good examples of easy, practical ways to use AI, I think that that's the way that you would approach that topic.
I agree.
Veronica says in APA journals, there's a recommendation to include the output of any AI generated content as an appendix with a published product. Ah, that's pretty good. Because the output can vary based on a number of factors, such as the history of the user and the addition of ChatGPT used, it would be really helpful to see how the raw content was adjusted to be more accurate or appropriate. Yeah, in an appendix. I think that that's a really good idea. Honestly, I'm probably going to steal that. That's a really good idea. Megan says, from my experience when using an AI tool, the more you train the model and continue the conversation, the better outcomes you receive as it starts to learn what you as the prompter are looking for when it comes to your voice, the target audience, etc. Yeah, there's a cool little thing in a lot of these GPT chatbots where it doesn't stop what it considers a conversation with you until you tell it to reset. So even if you ask it one question and then you ask it another question, it's going to take that first question into account when you ask the next one. And because of that, it'll get to know you more and more as it goes on. It's tough to use it as kind of a search engine proxy at first because of that, but after a while, you get to know it. Uses to generate outlines for content. Yeah, it's been hard to keep track of what's AI and what's your own work. Also very difficult, right? And that can be tricky when presenting the content in a professional environment. Yeah, and I do think that using the appendix idea is really neat. Often what I'll do when I have PowerPoints and I tend to talk forever and I have too many details that I would love to share with people, but I hold off on them because I'm like, I need to keep it simple. And then I get to the end and there's like 20 minutes left. And I'm like, oh man, I really could have used half of these slides that I took out. I just put them as an appendix in the end for additional information. And then I'm like, hey, well, okay, check out this graph over here. Here's all this cool data. We can dive into the deep end now. I think that having an appendix that does the same thing with the AI stuff, where not everybody has to go, all right, so here's what all the AI stuff I used was. Here's this outline that I used. Um, at least if you want to know, you can get there. So you're not necessarily in a black box trying to figure out how much of the ship of Theseus was the ship of Theseus after you put the other parts in. Like if you're able to document that process, I think it would help.
And
Brett, oh,
when I
yep.
use these in the classroom, I'm very transparent with the students that these are AI generated cases. So number one, they know that they're not patient protected information, which of course we always preach to them to be cognizant of HIPAA. So I make sure that I put that
Yeah.
disclaimer out there. But then I also do that because I want to teach the students how to use AI ethically, right? And how to use it. So I think one of the best ways to do that, in my opinion, is to show them how to use it ethically. And then they'll be more likely to do so than if you just leave them to their own devices to try to figure out how to do it ethically. Because we all struggle how to do it ethically, and we're trained educators. They're not.
Right.
And so I have the students, I make that disclaimer, we talk about it. I ask them, what would they do differently in the case? What part of the case was interesting to them or problematic to them, and so on and so forth. And so again, it's an iterative process, but I do have full disclosure with the students when I'm using it.
Yeah. Brett, who I believe I know. Hi, Brett. How you doing? It's getting better, but hallucinating citations when people ask for the sources. Ooh, that would be rough, just pointing at something that doesn't exist. So you would have to work with a person using the AI to track down the sources to review. Real reference librarian work right there, right? Taking this hallucinated thing and going, I wonder what the real source is, and then doing detective work to work your way back from generated resource to the source itself. Yeah, that's rough. I know that Google Gemini tries to figure out where it got its stuff from and then links you over to it, but it's not always correct. That is a weird thing. There's a negative bias that Brenda saw from students about using AI. And curious if anyone else has experienced this. I experienced this a lot, not in education, but over in my hobby of video games. There are a lot of folks who are younger than me who love reacting to stuff on social media that I'm not on, but I'll just read about it later. When somebody uses AI, it's often seen as something that was inauthentic that you could have paid a person to do, and therefore it's not worth the amount of money that you spent. It's not worth the time that you put in and found this thing. The most recent example of this is Call of Duty creating some rewards that you would have had to have paid for in the DLC that use AI art. And they're like, well, if you didn't put any time into this, why am I putting any money into this? So I do think that there is this idea of like, folks want the real, genuine you when they look at a resource, when they are chatting with you, when you're talking with them. They do not want something that's generated. Otherwise, they would say, well, I could have gone and done that myself. It's perception, but I do believe it's accurate. Really, the teacher matters. And I think that that's what they are getting at in the same way that they are in games as saying the designer matters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Richard, one for you from Justin. Noticing that the points that you made about content expertise are true. A lot of the utility of AI tools seems to scale with expertise. Like the more that you know about a subject, Zoom chat is going all over the place as y'all do that. The more equipped you are to use an AI tool for work on that subject. Where you see students stumble is using AI outside of their areas of expertise. Have you seen that? Have you seen that too?
Well, I have not, only because the students are using it in the context of my classes.
Oh yeah.
And so that's what I'm asking them to do. So I'm not asking them to show me what they do for their English class or their math class or their music theory class or whatever. It's only specific to my coursework. And so, but even with that, I find that by and large, I mean, this semester, I had one instance where I thought somebody was using AI on a homework assignment, and I addressed it with them. And they admitted that they did. They just didn't realize that they needed to cite some of where they got the information from.
Hmm.
So it was a learning experience and we moved past it. But no, for my purposes in the courses that I teach, and maybe part of it is because we're in a health profession and they're maybe a little more attuned to ethical standards and privacy and those kinds of behaviors, that maybe they're a little less, I would like to think, perhaps tempted to do so, but you never know.
Lori has been creating a more creative variety of assignments using Gen AI for students, encouraging students to engage in AI usage and critiquing AI responses so they learn firsthand what the uses and the limitations are, and why it's still necessary to be a content area expert to evaluate AI output. Yeah, it's like AI, geez, what is it? Meta learning, metacognition, that kind of thing. You use AI to figure out how to use AI to also figure out the limitations that are going on with AI as you use it. I think that that's a really holistic way to approach. Madison says we started testing some at the library, found they can be fairly accurate with few hallucinations, but you have to carefully craft the prompts that to get the result you want. ChatGPT sources are the biggest issue, just like what Brett had said earlier. Yeah, consensus might be an alternative site. Oh, okay. And okay, so these are two tools I have not seen. I think that that's something to look into for sure. All right. Lisa says, I use examples and use time saving as currency for faculty buy-in. Yeah, uh, definitely one of the benefits is saving time with these tools. I am crawling through these chat responses. Thank you so much for all of these. Amanda pulls points from notes, asks AI to summarize them. That's very cool. And then, yeah, you can organize the information in categories, and all the librarians are like, that's perfect. Ask it to create an APA 7th edition format of articles. All right. Uh, Tim says, to be honest, I rarely use AI at all. I'm a confident writer and realize not everyone is, but find doesn't write up to my standard. Yet genuinely enjoy writing an email, an outline, homework. Yeah, that's awesome. If you're able to create something that you like very quickly by on your own, then you don't need to, go over to an AI tool to ask it to hopefully make something that you're going to like if you're able to do that already.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that I've done is I've taken an actual report. I de-identified it, right? So there was no identifying information in there, but 90% of the stuff was there. And I've used it as a model, and I've actually had ChatGPT train itself to generate case reports based on the template that I actually had written off of a real patient, but that didn't have any identifying information. It was just very strict of that. And so it immediately got the idea of what I was looking for, and it generated 10 variations of it based on the prompts that I gave. And so, that was another way to do it, is start with something you already have written to give it the model that you want it to copy. And then it's a time saver. There, it's very much a time saver, without question.
Wow. There's so much good stuff here. I am going to start blazing through.
There is
Uh,
so much. Yeah, I'll just
yeah,
jump in
actually,
real
go
quick,
ahead.
Jeff. Yeah,
Hmm.
since we just have 45 minutes for this session, I just want to
Yeah.
remind everyone that on the Whova platform, there are plenty of opportunities to continue with the engagement. There are communities, there are messages. Take time to explore those because there are already really great conversations getting started on Whova related to this. I did want to thank everyone for attending and for Jeff and Richard for sharing your expertise and your perspectives. And I think this was a great vibe that we're all figuring it out together, right? And I want to thank our attendees for asking wonderful questions. If your question didn't get addressed here, go into Whova. And we do look forward to potentially seeing you tomorrow and maybe Thursday as well. And just as a quick looking ahead to tomorrow, we will kick off tomorrow at 11:45 a.m. Eastern Time for our introduction to day 2, and then heading straight into our session with James Glapa Grossklag, where he is talking about supersizing your OER initiative with ZTC Pathways. After that, there will be a drop-in session with James. And then following that, there is OpenStax in action, integrating open educational resources for teaching. So that's what we have in store for tomorrow. But again, another round of virtual applause for Jeff and Richard for a fantastic session today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. And again, this recording will be shared later on. Take care.